Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel. In this video we're going to discuss the most important events that took place in the world during the previous 12 hours. We have lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about the conflict on the territory of Ukraine, where both the Russians and the Ukrainians continued attacking each other with drones, but the previous night was a very interesting one. The Minister of Defense of Ukraine stated that during the night the Russians used just 94 drones to attack the territory of Ukraine, and the Ukrainians managed to bring down 74 of them. And the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation stated that the Ukrainians overnight used just 3 drones. So this is the smallest number of drones that the Ukrainians have used since the beginning of the special military operation. A very interesting number. You know that maybe this is the situation with the Ukrainian capabilities. Maybe the Russians, as a result of massive attacks, managed to reduce the Ukrainian capabilities significantly, or it's just due to the bad weather that is currently covering the territory of Ukraine and the territory of the Russian Federation. So many reasons we need to wait to understand what exactly is happening, but I would like to remind you that since the beginning of April, this is a third time when the Ukrainians used less than 20 drones to attack the territory of Russia. The previous time the Ukrainians used 10 drones. During the previous night they used 3 drones, and during at the beginning of April they used around between 20 or 30 drones or something like this. But at the same time we see that the Russians continue attacking the territory of Ukraine, and the Russians continue attacking Ukrainians with the drones in around of 100 per attack, 100 drones per attack. According to information we have, during the previous nights, the Russians were attacking mainly the northern parts of Ukraine, the Sumy and the northern parts of Sumy region and northern parts of Chernihiv region. We have lots of videos. For example, in this video we can see an explosion that took place somewhere inside of the city of Chernihiv. A German drone attacked the warehouse on the territory of the settlement. Another explosion took place on the territory of the village of Koryukovka, and here we can see the consequences of attack. Here we can see an explosion, another moment when a Russian drone attacked the city. As of the beginning of 27th of April of 2026, we don't know for sure what exactly the Russians were attacking, but probably some warehouses and ammo depots. But one thing we found out is that the Russians during the previous nights were attacking different gas stations through the northern regions of Ukraine. According to information we have, a gas station was attacked on the territory of the city of Shostka, which is located almost in the most northeastern parts of Ukraine. Here we can see the consequences of attack, and as a result of attack, as you can see, an oil base or oil tank was destroyed. Another gas station was destroyed on the territory of the city of Sumy, and this morning we received a picture where we can see the consequences of overnight's attack. So maybe the Russians were also attacking gas stations on the territory of the cities of Chernihiv and Koryukovka, probably. And one thing is clear, that the Russians are trying to reduce the Ukraine's logistic capabilities and not to allow their forces to receive fuel in time. But from the other side, we understand that the Russians most likely have everything to continue offensive operation. Furthermore, according to information we have, during the previous night, the Russians were attacking the city of Odessa. During the night, lots of explosions were recorded, and the Russians were also trying to hit oil bases on the territory of the city of Chernomorsk, and this is the video that was published by local sources, and here we can see a fuel, probably that's the consequences of the Russian attack on another fuel tank. And so this is the video of attack that took place overnight, and here we can see a civilian that was filming, making a video of the city of Odessa during the night. Most likely he heard the sound of German drone, and here we can see the explosion itself. Furthermore, today we received a video from the city of Dnipro, from the Dnipropetrovsk region, but this attack took place several days ago when during the massive Russian attack, when they used 666 drones and missiles together. And here we can see Russians attacking oil base in the southwestern parts of the settlement. I would like to remind you that during that massive attack, the Russians destroyed 2 or 3 oil bases through the territory of the city. Another important update is that today we received some pictures related to the Ukrainian attacks that have taken place since the beginning of April. And first, let's talk about the city of Tuapse. Today we have a very good analysis about the situation with the Tuapse oil refinery. This analysis was published by Western sources, and according to this information, as a result of attack that the Ukrainians carried out several days ago, the Ukrainians managed to destroy up to 24 tanks or 52% of the Tuapse oil refinery capacities. Furthermore, 4 tanks or 9% of tanks were damaged, and according to this picture, according to this information, the Russians managed to save just 18 tanks or 39% of the Tuapse oil refinery capacities, which means that most likely the export of fuel and oil and gas would be significantly reduced from this area. Furthermore, this morning, pro-Ukrainian sources published an update about attack in the direction of the city of Sevastopol. So in this video, for example, we can see a black smoke over the territory of the settlement. The sources are saying that the Ukrainians either attack port infrastructure or some oil base or oil tank. And later we received another update published by pro-Ukrainian sources, and it seems that yesterday in the evening the Ukrainians attacked the city of Sevastopol, trying to hit and to damage or even to destroy the Russian ships and fleet in this area. And according to the preliminary data, up to 5 military ships were hit by the Ukrainians as a result of overnight attack. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation on the ground. And first, let's talk about the Sumy direction, where during the previous days the Russians damaged and destroyed lots of gas stations. And according to information we have, the Russians these days and during the previous 24 hours continued their offensive operation. And we have additional changes on the ground along the second defense layer of the city of Sumy. These days we have lots of changes on the ground in this direction. This is the situation by the end of the 25th, this is the end of the 26th, and this is the beginning of the 27th of April of 2026. The Russians, according to information we have, improved their positions between the settlements of Mala, Karchakovka, Pisarevka and Khotyn. We are talking about additional infiltration area. Furthermore, this morning the group of forces north stated that as a result of clashes, the village of Taratutyne was captured by the Russians. Based on this report, we haven't adjusted anything because the settlement of Taratutyne was already colored under complete Russian control. Based on the video that was published somewhere at the beginning of April of 2026. The video was published on the 18th of April, and here we can see how Ukrainians were attacking positions of the armed forces of the Russian Federation, the territory of the settlement. So first updates that the Russians captured the settlement of Taratutyne were published on the 18th of April of 2026, and just 9 days after, the Minister of Defense, most likely in the group of forces north, confirmed this information. The Russians continue offensive operation, and as we understand, the Ukrainians currently suffer huge problems with logistics and with fuel. Now let's move further and let's talk about the Lyman direction. Something impossible is happening here these days, and this information was confirmed both by pro-Ukrainian sources, by neutral mappers, and by pro-Russian sources. According to information we have these days, the Ukrainians began the major Lyman counteroffensive operation, and as a result of this major Lyman counteroffensive operation, the Ukrainians managed to improve their positions significantly. And these are the changes on the ground between the dates. According to information I have, the Ukrainians, as a result of a counter-offensive operation, managed to recapture the villages of Sosnovo and up to 50% of the settlement of Borova. This information, of the most important thing, was published by a very reliable pro-Russian source who has connections with the soldiers on the ground. Furthermore, according to the same source, the Russians were forced to fall back from the southwestern and from the southern and from the northeastern parts of the settlement of Drobisheva. As for this update, this information was confirmed by pro-Russian sources and by neutral mappers. Very difficult to understand what exactly is happening in this direction and why the Russians are retreating from this area, but probably the Russians are retreating from the Lyman direction due to several reasons. And the first of them is that, if you remember, several days ago, the chief of the general staff of the armed forces of the Russian Federation, Valery Gerasimov, stated that the Russians established control for more than 70% of the city of Lyman, and according to his statements, we expected that the Russians would announce complete control over the city of Lyman before May's holidays. But now, due to this counteroffensive, we believe that the Russians would be forced to postpone this situation. So the announcement of complete control over the city, of course, this will raise questions to the chief of the General Staff of Russians. This is the first reason probably why the Ukrainians began their major offensive operation in the Lyman direction. And the second reason is that most likely the Russians decided that, or thought that they managed to stabilize the line of combat contact around the settlements of Lyman, Drobышevo and Novoselovka. So in this area, the Russians believed that they stabilized the situation, and they decided to move their forces in the northern direction with the purpose to begin an offensive operation in the direction of the settlement of Borova from the southeast. And according to information we have these days, the Russians managed to improve their position significantly according to different sources. So the Russians began advancing in the direction of Borova. And this is the second reason why most likely the Ukrainians counterattacked the Russians from the south. The main purpose of this counteroffensive operation to slow down the Russians and not to allow them to use their reserves with the purpose to advance in this area. Furthermore, I would like to remind you that several days ago, several pro-Russian, very reliable sources stated that as a result of clashes, the armed forces of the Russian Federation managed to answer the settlement of Borova from the northeast, and according to different sources, everything which is already inside of this, let's say, red line, inside of this area is already under complete Russian control. And furthermore, the chief of the General Staff of the Russian Federation, Gerasimov, several days ago also stated that the clashes are already taking place on the territory of the settlement of Borova. So as of now, we don't have proofs, we don't have reports from different reliable sources or mappers, but very reliable, I'm talking that we use every day, but we have this situation. So which means that everything is possible, and which means that the Russians most likely have already launched the Borova offensive operation with the purpose to take under complete control the central Kupiansk pockets. These days the Russians managed to improve their position significantly in the northern Kupiansk pocket and in the area of the city of Kupiansk. Now the Russians shift their focus in the direction of the Borova pocket, so they're trying to take under complete control over the river of Oskol, along the river itself on the Russian side. So that is why the Ukrainians are trying to ruin the Russians' plans and they're counterattacking. As for the Sloviansk direction and the Kramatorsk direction, during the previous 12 hours, we received small changes along the Seversk-Donetsk-Donbass canal. These are the changes on the ground, and according to these changes, we see that the Russians began advancing on the Ukrainian side of canal, trying to outflank positions of the armed forces of Ukraine around the villages of Tikhonovka and Malinovka. And I would like to remind you that these days, the Russian sources confirmed that during these days, they managed to improve their position significantly on the Ukrainian side of canal. Now let's talk about the Kostiantynivka direction. During the previous 12 hours, we received lots of updates that confirmed that the Russians continue their major offensive operation. So these are the changes on the ground between the dates starting from the 24th of April of 2026. And as you can see, during the previous 2 days, the map has been adjusted significantly, especially in the southwestern and the western directions. So these are the changes. Once again, according to these changes, the Russians managed to answer the settlement of Dovga Balka, and the Russians continue the clearing operation. Furthermore, the Russians managed to establish almost complete control over the settlement of Vilinovka, and furthermore, the Russians continue infiltration process in the western direction of the city of Kostiantynivka. So as you can see, significant changes, significant progress on the ground, and in coming days we will receive obviously additional updates on this matter. Furthermore, the Russians continue attacking positions of the armed forces of Ukraine in the area of the city of Kostiantynivka itself with aviation. Lots of explosions were recorded, the Russians destroying temporary deployment points. Furthermore, according to latest updates, the Russians also have improved their positions on the eastern flank. So these territories, as you can see, were captured by Russians, and we have several videos that confirm this information. In these videos, we can see how Ukrainians were attacking edge positions of the armed forces of the Russian Federation in this area. So based on these videos, based on these updates, we see that the Russians continue advancing, and as of the beginning of the 22nd 27th of April of 2026, the Russians had captured up to 15% of the city of Kostiantynivka, and the Russians continue advancing. Pro-Ukrainian sources published a video from the N20 road where we can see a lot of vehicles that were damaged and destroyed by the Russians with FPV drone attacks. Currently, the Ukrainians lost any possibilities to use vehicles to answer the city of Kostiantynivka from the northwestern direction. The only way to do this is on your own. Now let's move further. As for the Dobropolye, Zaporozhye and Dnipropetrovsk directions, we have just one important update. The Russians, according to several pro-Russian sources, have improved their position significantly in the area of the settlement of Novopavlovka, and according to different pro-Russian sources, by the morning of the 27th of April of 2026, the Russians had captured up to 50% of the settlement, and the Russians continue advancing. Now we're talking not about infiltration zones, we're talking about the process when the Russians are digging deeper, and a process when the Russians are trying to create a very strong control and strong positions through this area, which means that in coming days the settlement of Novopavlovka most likely would be completely captured by the armed forces of the Russian Federation. We have covered most of the updates regarding the conflict on the territory of Ukraine. Now let's discuss the situation in the western parts of Africa in the state of Mali. According to information we have, according to the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation, the Russians were forced to retreat from the northern parts of the state, at least from several cities. From the city of Kidal, the Russians withdraw their forces from this area, and we have lots of videos on this matter. We can see how separatists were staying along the main corridors of evacuation of the Russian troops. We see that the Russian convoys are leaving this area without any resistance from the separatist forces. Furthermore, we have lots of updates on this matter, and later we received a report published by the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation. They stated that the Russians were forced to fall back from this area. The Russians were trying to stabilize the situation in this region with aviation, with forces, but at some point of resistance, the Russians realized that they have no chances to save control over these territories, and they decided to save vehicles and forces with the purpose to retreat in the southern direction towards the city by the name of Gao. Furthermore, we received a report that the Russians were also forced to retreat from the settlement of Tesalits. An agreement has been reached on the withdrawal of Russian Ministry of Defense African Corps forces from the settlement of Tesalim in the northeastern Mali. So based on these reports, it seems that we were completely correct by coloring the most northern and the northeastern parts of the state of Mali as territories under control of separatists. Now the Russians are moving in the direction of the city of Gao. This is the settlement, and this is a very important because this settlement was also under attack of separatists, but the Russians and the government forces of Mali managed to stabilize the situation around the settlement. This is one of the most important towns in the northeastern parts and in the eastern parts of Mali, because there is a bridge, and this is probably the only bridge, according to information we have, the only bridge that goes through the main river of Mali on the territory of Mali. So which means who controls the bridge will be able to control the logistics between the northeastern parts of the state and the southwestern part. So it's a crucial question for the Russians to control this territory and not to allow anybody to take and complete this bridge between the cities of Gao and Vabaria. As for the capital of Mali, Bamako, we received lots of updates as a result of a situation that started several days ago. The separatists managed to assassinate the Minister of Defense of the state, but from the other side, the situation is stable. The locals and different media stated that militants in Mali operated under the guidance of Ukrainian and Western instructors. Terrorist losses exceeded 1,000 people. Ukrainian and European mercenaries participated in attacks on government facilities and units of government forces. So this is the situation. We see that it's just the beginning. Most likely the Western countries, the Ukrainians as well, will try to make everything they can with the purpose to reduce the Russian influence in this area and to force the Russians to retreat from this territory, which means that in coming days we'll see more clashes. Most likely the separatists will regroup in coming days, will stabilize their checkpoints, strong points, and then they will continue offensive operation towards the settlement of Gao with the purpose to establish control over the only bridge in this area. We have covered most of the updates regarding the Western Africa. Now let's discuss the situation in the Middle East. According to information we have, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Arachi, today arrives in Moscow, where he's going to have a meeting with the President of the Russian Federation. Putin will hold a meeting with Iranian Foreign Minister Arachi, Peskov commented. Furthermore, according to information we have, he has already arrived on the stage of the city of St. Petersburg, and he's going to have a meeting with Putin in coming days, and most likely they will discuss, first of all, the nuclear issue, the question of enriched uranium and the further process. As of the current situation, according to info we have, the Iranians, through the Pakistani side, send a message to the United States of America proposing them a ceasefire and a ceasefire plan that consists of 3 paragraphs. The most important one is that ceasefire will continue. The second one, the stabilization process and the legislative process of the Strait of Hormuz under control of the Amman side and the Iranian side. And we had a very interesting picture. Arakchi met with the foreign minister of the Sultanate of Oman in Muscat, and they were discussing the legislation over the Strait of Hormuz. And according to the Iranian side, these 2 states will legislate the transition through this area, and they will control the traffic, and they will control tankers, which of course, and they will be able to get revenues from this. And so this is the second paragraph of this agreement, and the third one is that the United States of America and the Iranians will return to the question of the uranium enrichment in the future, without specifying when exactly this is going to happen. Iran is no longer interested in a deal that includes limits on its nuclear program. The country is currently focused on negotiating terms to end the war, including the future of the Strait of Hormuz, compensation for damages, the lifting of sanctions, and removing the ongoing U.S. Navy blockade. Nuclear issues may be discussed at a later time or in a separate deal. So, furthermore, another important thing is that according to information we have, the Israel has provided the Iron Dome to the United Arab Emirates, which means that from the other side we see that the states of the Middle East continue preparation before the next round of escalation. At the same time, we received lots of updates about the positions of the U.S. fleets in the Syria ships. There are lots of ships, military ships of the United States of America were recorded in the Syria, especially lots of destroyers. So aircraft carriers Abraham Lincoln, Gerald Ford, George Bush, and destroyers Gonzales, Balkelly, Mahan, Winston, and many others. So which means that this group of forces is located here for a reason, but not without any specific reason, and they will finish their job. As for the southern parts of Lebanon, these days we received lots of updates from the Hezbollah side, and according to these updates, these days FPV drones of Hezbollah forces attack significantly the Israeli defense forces. And the most important thing is that according to information we have, Hezbollah began using fiber optic drones. So which means that first of all, there is no ceasefire in this area, that the clashes in this region are intensifying. And the most important thing is that now the Israel and Lebanon, Hezbollah is trying to adapt to a modern warfare that we could see and might see on the territory of Ukraine, which means that from this perspective, it is impossible to predict how the conflict will continue developing. And that's it for today. For the short video, the Military Summary channel reminds that we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.